Greetings, AFSers. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about your AFS host family. We are going to discuss some things to expect from your American host family and your host family home, some cultural realities, as well as some important points about COVID-19 and some ways that your host family may want to keep safe and healthy during your exchange year. Now, you may be aware that the United States is a very diverse place, and this is true for families. There really is no such thing as a quote unquote typical American family because they can be very different. They can be big or small. They can live in urban areas, rural areas, or suburban areas. And they can come from a variety of racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds as well. It's possible that people in your host family may know or speak more than one language. It's also possible that someone in your host family may identify with the LGBTQIA community. Whatever your family might look like, they are excited to meet you and to share their home and their community with you. American culture can also be a little different state to state or region to region, or even family to family. Your host family may want to introduce you to a food or a piece of history that might be specific to their particular region or area or state. American families can also be diverse in terms of what they value, what they believe in, their opinions, and what they like to do. Many American families observe a religion, and it can be common for some families to attend religious services regularly and celebrate religious holidays. Your host family may be interested in sharing this part of their life with you. While AFS does not allow students to be forced to participate in religious content if they don't want to or just don't feel comfortable doing it, we also know that for many American families, religious traditions and practices are really just a part of their lives that they might be excited to share. Some other things that American families have in common. It can be common in many American families for there to be rules in the home or in the family. It can be common for there to be chores or curfews. Your host family may ask and expect you to follow these. Some common examples of possible rules or chores may include something like no mobile phones at the dinner table, or keep your room clean, or help with the dishes. Rules and expectations can vary a lot family to family, but it's possible that your host family may have some that they hope and expect you to follow because they follow them themselves in their home. If you ever have any questions about a rule or a chore or an expectation that your host family has for you, we encourage you to ask your family about it or talk to your local AFS volunteers. Another thing that can be very common in many American families is for people to use cars to get from place to place. Many American families have at least one car, maybe even two, maybe even more. Even when families live in more urban areas and cities where there might be public transportation, using cars is a very common way to still get from place to place. So you will likely get from place to place by getting a ride in a car by someone in your host family. At the beginning of your year, your host family will likely want to complete a document with you called a participant and host family questionnaire. The participant and host family questionnaire is a wonderful exercise. It's a collaborative exercise that allows you and your host family to have discussions together about common expectations in the home. We encourage you to take the time to do this exercise with your host family. It can really help your experience get off to a great start. Another helpful exercise to do together is the Cultural Exploration Questionnaire. We recommend this tool as well. It's also a document and a collaborative exercise that is meant to help students and families be able to articulate some of their cultural lenses to raise mutual awareness early on and foster mutual understanding in the home. Like many areas of the world, the United States still takes COVID very seriously. And so it will most likely be the case that your host family will also take COVID and personal protection very seriously. Many families still like to do things like social distance or limit interactions in big crowds. Some families still really like to use masks. And many Americans have received both a COVID vaccine and a booster. However, it's also important to note that there can be some differences family to family in how people choose to protect themselves and their families. While the Center for Disease Control and Prevention remains a primary nationwide public health authority that AFS-USA often defers to on COVID-19 matters, it should also be noted that even individual states and sometimes even towns or cities can have their own sets of guidelines. It can happen that states and state authorities will have guidelines that they share with their citizens. So know where you can go to get that information. The CDC has a website, and many local and state health authorities also have online resources, and you can feel free to go to those resources and find out about what's being recommended for people in your area of the country. So with that said, your host family may use safety practices that could be slightly different than what you are used to at home. If you have any questions or concerns about your host family's safety practices or about your comfort level in adhering them, talk to someone about it. If your host family's safety practices just feel to you too new, too different, too unusual than what you're used to back in your home country, you can talk to your host family about it. That's okay. You can also talk to your liaison and your local volunteers about it. It is also possible that over the course of your program, you might become eligible for and interested in getting the vaccine or in getting boosted if you have not yet been. You may obtain the COVID-19 vaccine and the booster on program if you are eligible. If you pursue receiving a COVID-19 vaccine or booster while on program, follow these important steps. Firstly, discuss it with your sending parents back home and with your doctor. If your parents and doctor back home have no questions or concerns about your getting the vaccine or booster, you can proceed with getting an appointment to get your shot. Secondly, most vaccine facilities in the United States have their own permission forms or consent forms that they will need to sign by a legal guardian or a parent. In those cases, if you are under 18 years old, these forms that you will be shown must be signed by your sending parents and legal guardians back home. They really can't be signed by your host family.